The studio lights were already warm when Burt Reynolds stepped onto the stage. The applause came instantly. It was loud, welcoming, familiar. For years, that sound had followed him everywhere. It was the sound of success, the sound of being loved, the sound of being Burt Reynolds. He smiled the same confident smile America knew so well. The mustache, the calm walk, the relaxed shoulders. He looked like a man who belonged exactly where he was, but something was different. Johnny Carson was not sitting behind his desk. He was standing. At first, Burt didn't think much of it. Johnny sometimes stood to greet special guests. They had known each other for years. They were more than host and guest. They were friends, but Johnny wasn't smiling. That was the first sign. Johnny Carson always smiled when Burt came out. Always. It was part of their rhythm, their comfort, their history. This time, his face was serious, too serious. Johnny stepped away from his desk. Slowly, calmly, he walked toward Burt. Instead of waiting behind the desk like he always did, the audience's applause began to fade. Not completely, but enough for people to notice something wasn't normal. Burt stopped, walking. He didn't sit down. He didn't even reach the guest chair. He just stood there. Johnny stopped a few feet away from him for a moment. Neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavy. Strange. The audience didn't know why, but they could feel it. Ed McMahon, sitting beside Johnny's desk, watched closely. His hand rested near his coffee cup, but he didn't lift it. He just stared. The band was quiet. The cameras stayed locked on. Burt's face, his smile was still there, but it was weaker now, less certain. He looked at Johnny. Johnny looked back at him. There was something in Johnny's eyes Burt had never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment. Something else. Something deeper. Something personal. Johnny held a small piece of paper in his hand. It wasn't large, just a single sheet, but the way he held it made it feel important, dangerous. Even Burt noticed it immediately. His eyes moved to it without meaning to. Johnny followed his glance. Then Johnny did something no one expected. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't announce anything to the audience. He leaned slightly closer to him. Burt spoke quietly into his microphone, but the microphone was still live. "Before you sit down," Johnny said calmly, "there's something we need to talk about." The words hung in the air, simple words, but they carried weight. Burt felt it instantly. His chest tightened. He didn't know exactly why, but he felt it. He looked at Johnny again, searching his face for some kind of explanation. Johnny didn't look away. He didn't smile. He didn't soften his expression. He just stood there waiting. The audience shifted in their seats. They couldn't hear everything. They couldn't understand fully what was happening, but they could feel the tension. Something was wrong, very wrong. Burt swallowed. His hands felt colder than they should have under the hot studio lights. He forced a small smile, tried to keep things normal, tried to pretend everything was fine. But Johnny didn't move. He didn't return to his desk. He didn't invite Burt to sit down. He just stayed there, standing between Burt and the chair, blocking the routine, blocking the comfort, blocking the normal flow of the show. Burt felt exposed. For years, this stage had been a place of control, a place where he knew what would happen, where he knew the rhythm. Tonight he didn't know anything. He glanced at the audience. Hundreds of faces looked back at him, waiting, watching. Millions more were watching from their homes. He knew that he could feel it. The cameras didn't blink. They never did. Johnny lifted the paper, slightly, not enough for the audience to read, just enough for Burt to see it clearly. Burt's eyes fixed on it. Something inside him shifted. His smile faded. Not completely, but enough. Enough for Johnny to see it, enough for the cameras to see it, enough for everyone to feel it. Johnny spoke again, still calm, still steady. "I received this today." He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. Burt's face changed. Only slightly, but it was there. The confidence was cracking. He didn't reach for the paper. He didn't ask to see it. He just stared at it, as if he already knew. Johnny watched him carefully. He wasn't trying to embarrass him. He wasn't trying to attack him. He looked like a man carrying something heavy himself. The audience was completely silent. Now no laughter, no applause, just waiting. Ed McMahon shifted in his chair. He looked uncomfortable. He looked like he wanted to say something, but didn't know what to say. Johnny lowered the paper slowly. His eyes never left Burt felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had been on this stage many times. He had told jokes here, he had laughed here, he had been relaxed here. Tonight, he felt none of that. Tonight, he felt exposed, vulnerable. He didn't understand how Johnny knew, or why this was happening now. But deep inside, he felt something else. Fear, not the kind of fear he showed in movies, not the kind audiences watched safely from their seats. This was real, this was personal. He looked at Johnny again, for answers, for help, for anything. Johnny's expression didn't change. He didn't look like a host. He looked like a friend forced into an impossible position. Johnny spoke again, his voice softer now. "Are you all right?" The question surprised Burt. It wasn't accusing, it wasn't angry, it was concern. That made it worse. Burt opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He wasn't ready. He wasn't prepared for this. Not here, not now, not in front of everyone. Johnny took a small step closer, not aggressively, carefully. Supportively, as if he didn't want Burt to face it alone. The audience leaned forward in their seats. They could feel it. Now this wasn't entertainment. This was something else, something real, something human. Burt's breathing felt heavier. He tried to steady himself, tried to regain control, but control was slipping. Johnny lowered his voice. Again, only slightly, but enough for the microphones to carry it. "We don't have to do this unless you're ready." The words hung between them, and offered at a choice. But Burt knew something Johnny didn't say out loud. The moment had already begun. There was no easy way back. The cameras were rolling. The audience was watching. The silence was growing heavier by the second. Burt looked at the paper again. That small piece of paper. It looked harmless, but it wasn't. It represented something he had tried not to think about. Something he had carried quietly. Something no one was supposed to see. Until now. He closed his eyes for just a moment. A single breath. A single pause. When he opened them again, nothing felt the same. The Tonight Show stage no longer felt like safe ground. It felt like a place where everything could change, and deep down, Burt Reynolds understood something clearly for the first time that night. This wasn't just another appearance. This was the moment he had been afraid of for years, and there was no escaping it now. 3 hours before Burt Reynolds stepped onto the Tonight Show stage, he was sitting alone in his dressing room. The room was quiet, too quiet. Outside, people moved through the hallways. Crew members talked. Doors opened and closed. Someone laughed in the distance. It sounded like any other night at NBC Studios, but inside that dressing room, everything felt different. Burt sat in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. He didn't see the movie star everyone else saw. He didn't see the confident man from the posters. He saw someone tired. Someone carrying something heavy. His hand rested on the table in front of him. His fingers tapped softly against the surface, without him realizing it. He was waiting. He wasn't sure for what, but he could feel it. Something was coming. A soft knock broke the silence. Burt looked up. "Come in," he said. The door opened slightly. A young production assistant stepped inside. "You have a delivery," she said politely. Burt frowned. "A delivery?" She nodded and handed him a plain envelope. No return address. No name. Nothing written on the front, except his dot. She left without another word. Burt stared at the envelope. In his hand, it felt light, but his chest felt heavy. He turned it over slowly. Still nothing. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Just one. He unfolded it. His eyes moved across the words, and everything inside him froze. The room felt colder. His fingers tightened around the paper. He read the words again. Short, simple, clear. Someone knew the truth. For a long moment, he didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just sat there, staring at the paper like it might disappear. But it didn't. It stayed there, real, unavoidable. He closed his eyes slowly, and for the first time in years, he felt that night again. Not the studio, not the cameras. Another place. Another time. 7 years earlier. Florida. It had been late, the kind of late where everything felt quiet and still. Burt had gone out alone. He didn't want attention. He didn't want people recognizing him. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He just wanted coffee. Just wanted to sit. Just wanted to be normal for a while. He sat in a small diner booth, near the corner. The air smelled like coffee and fried food. The lights were dim. The place was nearly empty. He liked it that way. No pressure, no expectations, just silence. A waitress approached his table. She looked young, maybe 19. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her notepad. She looked at him carefully, not excited, not smiling, just uncertain. "Are you Burt Reynolds?" she asked quietly. He hesitated for a moment, then he nodded. He expected her to smile, expected excitement, expected the usual reaction, but she didn't smile. She didn't ask for an autograph. She didn't laugh. She just looked at him, and there was something in her eyes. Something wrong, something afraid. She glanced behind her, then back at him. "I need help," she whispered. The words were so quiet, he almost didn't hear them. He leaned forward slightly. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. She hesitated, like she wasn't sure if she should say anything at all. Her hands trembled more now. She lowered her voice. "He's watching me." Burt frowned. "Who?" she swallowed. "My stepfather." She didn't look toward the kitchen, but Burt noticed her eyes move slightly in that direction. He followed her gaze. He saw a man standing near the back, watching, openly, but watching enough. Burt felt something tighten inside him. The girl looked back at Burt. Her voice shook. "He's hurt me." The words barely came out. She quickly wiped her eyes, like she didn't want anyone to see. Burt felt his stomach drop. He didn't know what to say at first. He wasn't in a movie. He wasn't playing a character. This was real. This was happening. She pulled her sleeve down over her arm, but not before he saw it. Bruises faded and fresh, old and new, proof. He felt anger rise inside him. Not loud anger, cold anger, controlled anger. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Sarah," she said. Her voice was fragile, like it could break at any moment. She looked at him with something he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope, not hope in a movie star, hope in a person. She didn't want fame. She didn't want attention. She wanted safety. She wanted someone to listen, someone to believe her. Burt realized something in that moment. She wasn't asking Burt Reynolds, the actor. She was asking Burt Reynolds, the man. He reached into his wallet. He pulled out everything he had, cash. He placed it on the table. Her eyes widened. "I can't take that," she said quickly. "Yes, you can," he said calmly. "You need to get somewhere safe." She stared at the money, like she didn't believe it was real. He wrote down a phone number, handed it to her. "Call this number when you're safe." She nodded slowly. Tears filled her eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Burt stood up. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just moved. He walked toward the kitchen, toward the man. Each step felt heavier, but he didn't stop. The man noticed him coming. Their eyes met. The man's expression hardened. "Can I help you?" the man asked coldly. Burt didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten loudly, but his words were clear. "You leave her alone." The man laughed slightly, like it was a joke. Burt didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He just stared at him. The silence stretched between them. Heavy, uncomfortable, dangerous. For a moment, Burt didn't know what the man might do, but he didn't move. He didn't back down. Finally, Burt turned and walked away. He didn't look back. He left the diner, got into his car, and drove away. His hands shook on the steering wheel, not from fear, from uncertainty. He didn't know if he had helped. He didn't know if he had made things better or worse. Days later, he got a phone call. She was safe. She had left. She had escaped. He should have felt relief, but instead, he felt something else. Responsibility, because he knew something. The story wasn't over. It would never be over. And now, 7 years later, sitting in that dressing room holding that piece of paper, he realized something else. The past hadn't stayed buried. It had found its way back. He looked at his reflection again. He didn't see Burt Reynolds, the star. He saw the man from that diner, the man who made a choice that changed everything. He folded the paper slowly, placed it on the table. Outside, someone knocked on the door. 5 minutes, Mr. Reynolds. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the mirror, because in 5 minutes, he wouldn't just be walking onto a stage, he would be walking into the truth. And this time there would be nowhere to hide. The red light on the camera turned on. That light meant one thing. There was no turning back. Burt Reynolds stood under the studio lights, but he no longer felt their warmth. Just minutes ago, he had walked onto this same stage with confidence. Now, he stood frozen, staring at Johnny Carson, who was only a few feet away. Neither man spoke. The silence grew heavier with each passing second. The audience didn't understand what was happening, but they could feel it. Something had shifted. Something serious. Johnny held the paper in his hand. That paper, the one Burt had seen earlier, the one he had hoped would never reach this stage. Johnny looked at him carefully, like he was trying to give him time. Time to breathe, time to decide. But time was the one thing Burt no longer had. Millions of people were watching. Waiting. Johnny spoke slowly. I want to give you a chance to say something. His voice was calm, not accusing, not angry, just calm. That made it harder. Burt felt his throat tighten. His mouth was dry. His heart beat faster than it ever had before on this stage. For years, he had controlled his image, controlled his words, controlled what people saw. But tonight, control was slipping away. He glanced at the audience. Hundreds of strangers. All watching him, all waiting. He looked back at Johnny. His friend. Johnny wasn't smiling. He wasn't playing the role of the late-night host anymore. He was standing there like a man who understood the weight of what was happening. Burt tried to speak, but no sound came out. He took a breath. Another breath. Finally, his voice came out quiet, fragile. I never wanted this to come out like this. The audience leaned forward. Johnny didn't interrupt. He didn't rush him. He just listened. Burt looked down at the floor. Not at the cameras. Not at the audience. Just the floor. As if the answers might be there. It was a long time ago, he said. His voice trembled. He paused. He could feel the fear rising inside him. The same fear he had carried for years. The same fear that had followed him into quiet moments, into empty hotel rooms, into sleepless nights. Johnny took a small step closer, not to pressure him, to support him. You don't have to rush, Johnny said softly. Those words almost broke him completely, because Johnny wasn't trying to expose him. He was trying to protect him. But Burt knew something Johnny didn't say out loud. The truth was already here. He couldn't hide anymore. He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them. He didn't pretend. He just stood there. Vulnerable. Human. I met someone, Burt said. The words came slowly, carefully. She needed help. He paused again. The audience didn't move, didn't cough, didn't whisper, just listened. He swallowed. I did what I thought was right. His voice cracked. He stopped, closed his eyes briefly. The memory was clear. Clear. He could see her face, hear her voice. Feel the weight of that moment all over again. Johnny watched him. Waiting. Giving him space. After that, Burt continued. Things happened. He struggled with the words, not because he didn't know them, because saying them made them real, more real than they had ever been. For years, he said quietly, I asked myself if I made the right choice. A tear rolled down his cheek. He didn't stop it. He didn't hide it. The audience saw it. The cameras saw it. America saw it. The strong man they thought they knew was breaking. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Honestly. Johnny's single quotes as face softened. He understood. Now. Not everything, but enough. Burt looked at him. His voice barely above a whisper. I never stopped thinking about it. Johnny nodded slowly, not judging. Just listening. That made it easier and harder at the same time, because this wasn't about defending himself anymore. This was about truth. Burt took another breath. For 7 years, he said, I carried it. The words felt heavy. Real. Permanent. He looked at the audience again. He saw their faces. Concerned. Sympathetic. Human. They weren't judging him. They were feeling with him, and that surprised him. He had expected anger, disappointment. But instead, he saw understanding. Johnny spoke gently. You tried to help someone. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Burt nodded. Double quotes. Yes. Johnny stepped closer. You've been carrying that ever since. Another nod. Yes. Burt's voice broke again. I didn't know if I had the right to let it go. That was the truth, the real truth, not the facts. Not the story. The feeling. Guilt. The responsibility. Johnny placed a hand on Burt's shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. It wasn't Johnny Carson, the host. It was Johnny Carson, the friend. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, Johnny said quietly. Those words shattered the last wall Burt had built around himself. His shoulders dropped. His body trembled. For years, he had held it in, held it together, stayed strong. But strength had become exhaustion. Exhaustion had become pain. He covered his face briefly, with his hand, trying to breathe, trying to stay present, trying not to fall apart completely. But he couldn't stop the tears. They came quietly, honestly. He wasn't ashamed anymore. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was just a man standing on a stage, telling the truth. The audience remained silent, not out of discomfort, out of respect. Johnny didn't remove his hand. He stayed beside him, steady, supportive, present. Burt lowered his hand. His eyes were red, but clearer, lighter, like something inside him had shifted. For the first time in years, he wasn't holding it alone. Johnny looked at him, then looked at the audience, then back at Burt. He didn't expose him. He didn't accuse him. He did something else. He stood beside him. That was enough. More than enough. The cameras kept rolling, but this was no longer television. This was something real, something rare, something human. Burt Reynolds, the man everyone believed was unbreakable, had finally allowed himself to break, not because he was weak, because he was human. And in that moment, standing under those lights, with his friend beside him and millions watching, he felt something he hadn't felt in 7 years. Relief. But the night wasn't over yet, because what was about to happen next was something no one, not Burt, not Johnny, not anyone in that studio could have ever expected. For a moment, no one moved. The studio was completely silent, not the normal silence of television, not the silence between jokes. This was different. This was the silence of people witnessing something real. Burt Reynolds stood under the lights, his chest rising and falling slowly. His eyes were still wet, but something inside him had changed. The weight he had carried for so many years was no longer hidden. Johnny Carson remained beside him. He didn't return to his desk. He didn't create distance. He stayed close, not as a host, as a friend. The audience watched both men carefully. They had come expecting laughter, stories, and entertainment. Instead, they were watching something far more human. Something far more important. Johnny looked at Burt, then gently removed his hand from Burt's shoulder. But he didn't step away. He spoke softly. You did what you believed was right. Burt didn't answer immediately. He stared ahead, thinking, thinking about the years, thinking about the silence, thinking about the nights. He had questioned himself over and over. I don't know, Burt said quietly. His voice was honest, not defensive, not proud, just honest. Johnny studied his face. You helped someone who needed help, Johnny said. That matters. Burt looked down at his hands. They were still slightly shaking. For years, those hands had played heroes on screen. They had held steering wheels, thrown punches, signed autographs. But tonight, they had done something far harder. They had let go. The audience remained silent. No applause, no interruption, just listening. Because they understood this moment wasn't finished. Not yet. Johnny turned slightly, looking out at the audience, then back at Burt. You've carried this alone, Johnny said. Burt nodded slowly. Yes. That one word carried years of pain, years of doubt, years of isolation. Johnny paused. Then he asked something simple, something unexpected. How does it feel now? Burt didn't answer right away. He took a slow breath. For the first time that night, his shoulders relaxed, just slightly. He searched for the right word. Finally, he spoke. Different. Johnny nodded, not pushing further, not forcing more words, because sometimes one word said everything. The audience shifted gently in their seats. They weren't restless. They were invested. They cared. Johnny walked back toward his desk slowly. But he didn't sit down. Instead, he picked up the piece of paper, the paper that had started everything. He looked at it for a moment, then looked at Burt. Then, without saying anything, he folded it. Carefully, deliberately, he placed it down on his desk. He didn't read from it. He didn't share its contents. He didn't use it. He left it there, powerless, because it no longer had power. The truth had already been spoken. Johnny turned back to Burt. You know, Johnny said quietly, people don't remember you for the things you hide. He paused. They remember you for the things you face. Burt listened carefully. Those words reached him, not as television, not as performance, as truth. He nodded slowly. The audience finally began to applaud, not loudly, not wildly, softly, respectfully. It wasn't applause for a movie star. It was applause for a man. Burt looked out at them. His eyes moved across the room. He saw understanding. He saw compassion. He saw something he hadn't expected. Acceptance. For years, he had feared this moment, feared that if people knew everything, they would see him differently. But they did see him differently. Not worse, better, more human, more real. Johnny stepped closer again. You don't have to answer this, Johnny said carefully. But if you could go back, would you make the same choice? The question hung in the air, heavy, important. Burt didn't hesitate this time. He nodded. Double quotes, yes. His voice was quiet, but certain. Johnny smiled softly, not his usual television smile. A genuine smile. The audience applauded again, stronger this time, because they understood, not the full details, not every part of the past, but the heart of it. A man had tried to help someone, and had carried the emotional cost alone. Until now. Johnny finally returned to his desk. He sat down slowly, but the energy in the room had changed. It was calmer now, lighter. Burt sat down in the guest chair. For the first time that night, the chair he hadn't been allowed to reach before. Now he sat in it, not as the confident star who walked out earlier, as someone transformed, not by fame, not by success, by truth. Johnny leaned slightly forward. I've known you a long time, Johnny said. Burt looked at him. Johnny continued, and I've never seen you more honest than you were tonight. Burt didn't know what to say. He simply nodded. The audience sat quietly. They knew they had witnessed something rare, something they would remember, not because of scandal, not because of shock, because of courage. Johnny looked toward the cameras. Millions of people were still watching, still listening, still feeling the weight of the moment. He spoke calmly. Sometimes, Johnny said, the hardest thing a person can do is stop hiding. He paused, and sometimes, that's also the bravest thing. He turned back toward Burt. Burt met his eyes. Two friends, no cameras, no audience, just understanding. The show continued, but nothing else that night would matter as much as what had already happened, because something invisible had shifted. Not in the audience, not in Johnny. In Burt. For 7 years, he had carried the past alone. Tonight, he didn't have to anymore. The lights were still bright, the cameras were still recording, but for the first time in years, Burt Reynolds didn't feel trapped by them. He felt free, not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to breathe, enough to move forward, enough to stop running from himself. As the show moved toward its end, Johnny stood up. He walked around his desk again, the same path he had taken earlier that night, but this time, it felt different. He extended his hand. Burt stood. He shook Johnny's hand, but Johnny didn't let go immediately. He placed his other hand on Burt's shoulder again. A simple gesture, a powerful one. The audience stood, applauding, not for performance, for truth. Johnny walked with Burt toward the edge of the stage, not as a host escorting a guest, as a friend walking beside a friend. They stopped at the edge. Burt looked out at the audience one last time. He nodded quietly. Grateful. Not for fame. Not for applause. For understanding. Then he walked offstage. The lights behind him slowly dimmed. The cameras turned away, but the moment stayed. Not on film, not in newspapers, in people's hearts. Because that night, America hadn't just seen Burt Reynolds, the movie star. They had seen Burt Reynolds, the man. And that was something far more powerful. For the rest of his life, Burt would appear on many stages. He would smile, he would laugh, he would tell stories, but nothing would ever match the quiet courage of that one night. The night he stopped hiding, the night he finally let the truth breathe, and in doing so, he finally allowed himself to breathe too.